Morning.
Morning. Welcome, Harrison. And welcome to everybody to the Eldership for Leaders podcast. And this morning, my afternoon, Harrison's morning, because he's in Washington, D.C., we're going to be talking about eldership and the work that we do in organisations and with the social systems from an eldership perspective. So let me just kind of give you a bit of a context before I introduce Harrison to you. And say a little bit more. So I first came across Harrison's book in 2016 when it was actually published. So I was kind of there at that time. And the book that I'm talking about is The Confessions of a Corporate Shaman. And this book, for me, in all the work that I've done in kind of from a systemic perspective, has been the one that has sat with me probably the most, because it's actually got the connections between all the different aspects of the things that I knew about and integrated into the work that we do from a systemic perspective. So even just the title, The Corporate Shaman. So I'd done quite a lot of studying around shamanism. And so to actually bring that into this work in a way that was practical and real and applicable to leaders was really brilliant from my point of view. And even the subtitle, Healing the Organisational Soul. So yeah, it really spoke to me. So welcome, Harrison, from that point of view. So what we're going to be talking about is transforming social systems, and looking at how we do that from an eldership perspective and the connection between the systemic world and eldership, and why, from my point of view, I think if we're stepping into eldership, we need to understand the systemic realm and we need to be able to work with it. It's an integral part of the work that we do as an elder when we're working with the systems. So I'm interested. So let's start there, Harrison. You know, what's your thinking around how does looking at things from an eldership perspective relate to working systemically in the social systems?
Well, we'll love to, Zena. Thank you so much for having me on the program. Very exciting to be here with you and to responding to your questions. One thing, I'll get to that relationship. One thing that struck me when you mentioned the shamanism and the link to that. What is the link to shamanism and elderhood? Well, one thing we're talking about when we talk about the soul of the organization, we're talking about something that's intangible, right? You don't see a soul. You don't know about what's going on with the soul, but you see the out picturing, you see the effect of what's going on. What happens internally that we don't see affects externally what we do see. And in an eldership, this is someone who has the discrimination, the intellect, the wisdom, and the love to make the connection between the two. What's happening on the internal and attending to the internal with that insight so that something happens in a positive way with the external. And what does that imply? That implies that that's a person who sees the bigger picture, doesn't necessarily take sides in a partisan way, but has goodwill and compassion and wants to make a positive impact on the whole system, right? And I would say that would apply in a lot of situations, like what's happening in the world right now. We're very polarized, and yes, you could say, all right, I really support Israel. Oh yes, I really support Palestinian, and make the other side wrong. But how about supporting humanity? How about the overall system that's creating this? And what do we do? What can we do to bring about a deeper healing so that we're not so basically polarized and damaging each other out of that polarity? So that takes a really big picture thinker, seer, to see the whole system and step back and understand themselves well enough so that if they have a certain reactivity or a certain tendency to judge or tendency to make wrong, that they can manage that and say, well, let me look deeper what might be going on. Let me not jump to conclusions and create this sense somebody has to be wrong and they have to pay for it because I'm right, obviously, right? That's not elderhood. That's some kind of activist that that often may be just perpetuating the dysfunctions that we see in our system because we're not looking deeper, and we're not looking with that type of insight that that love brings, that compassion brings, that an open mind and an open heart bring. So that's my definition of an elder. They bring wisdom and love and insight, and for the good of everyone, for the bigger system. And in working systemically, one of the concepts that to be effective as a systemic facilitator, and it applies really to facilitation in general, when you step into a complex organization and there's a lot going on, and a lot of people are saying, well, somebody else is the problem, some other part of the system is the problem. One of the things that helps a facilitator be effective, especially a systemic one, is objectivity. You listen with the concern and a willingness to understand and feel what the person is saying, but you don't jump immediately into taking sides. We lose our effectiveness as facilitators if we start taking sides and start being judgmental right away, making assumptions. This was good, that's bad, and I'm going to right that wrong. What happens when we do that? Structurally, we're falling into the what's called the trauma triangle, where there's a victim and a persecutor and a rescuer. And guess what? We want to stay out of that triangle, especially out of the rescuer role. And we want to be aware of where we have trauma in our own system or activities in our own system that put us in that victim or persecutor role, right? So if we can understand how our own structural past is affecting us and not be unconsciously caught up in it, then we can bring more conscious awareness to what's really going on, to see past that and to see some of the underlying aspects that are affecting things now and creating the polarity. So one of the things that an elder I would think, is they've been around the block enough times to learn, okay, what I see, not to rush to judgment, but what I see here as a problem just may be the symptom of something deeper that everyone is a part of. Everyone has a part of in their mindset, in their history, in their social history that's outpicturing now in the current reality. So social systems are a lot like family systems, which are a lot like personal systems, right? There's just a different scale. And so when we work with someone individually, we want to get that perspective. Okay, certainly there's someone that they feel is a persecutor towards them, or they feel victimized by, or someone they feel I need to rescue. We want to get the perspective. Well, what might be going on? How might this be a reenactment of something that happened in the past that the person's not even aware of? Same is true in a social system. We kind of want to ask questions and not rush in and try to fix the thing that's showing up, because often that's just putting more of the same, doing the same thing, getting the same unhappy results. We want to hold off a little bit and start digging a little deeper. What else happened here? What else is going on here? And what are some of the thought bubbles that aren't being articulated, or belief systems that aren't being articulated verbally, but are certainly being acted out unconsciously, non-verbally. So this I think is an aspect of elderhood, because you have the maturity. You've seen this before in different situations. Learned how to manage your own emotional reactions and judgments and hold off and step back and be open to a deeper insight, and hold the space for deeper insights to emerge. So you slow down.
So one of the things that I was really fascinated about when I kind of read your book and got to know you better is kind of, when you're working, when people kind of ask you to kind of come in and look at an issue that they've got in an organization or even a team, and we're talking about trauma now, but people are being more verbal about that. But there's also this huge fear of like, we don't know what's hidden in the system. And what if we open something up and unpack something up? It's like, is it going to be like opening Pandora's box? And so there's this huge fear. And I know you've got so much experience of working in organizations systemically. What happens, I learned a lot about kind of the contracting up front and things like that that you do, but I'm just kind of thinking from your point of view, you're one of the first people to step into this realm with this work. What did you meet when you were there, and how did you work with it?
Well, thank you for bringing that question up about there is great deal of fear of talking about the elephant in the room, or even what we would call the shark in the room, where the elephant might be a puzzle, but there's some solution somewhere. The shark might be a threat also, but it's a mystery. What the heck is going on here? At least not adding up why there is so much dissension or confusion or whatever. We're not getting a clear read on that. So there's a lot of fear, like you said, about discussing the real problem and even giving words to the problem, because what if people get all upset and walk out of the room or get angry? And well, the irony is they need to be upset and be heard and be seen. That's the real challenge. You go into an organization, you can feel in a family, in an organization, when things are not discussed but need to be, a heaviness, right? A deep unease. There's a fear there, but also a repression of that fear. It's draining. It's it's distracting. And yet what I found time and time again, if the right container is set up, again, then someone who's facilitating it is seen as not partisan, but as there for the whole system. And people don't maybe get that, but they sense it. Oh, you're there for the whole system. You're not there just as management or just this particular department. You're there for everyone. And you'll protect them. If someone starts to attack in an unfair way, you'll protect and stop that. So you have a certain level of what power or authority that you're using for the good of all. And that is communicated. Then there's enough safety to express authentic emotion. In other words, this is not labeling people, but this is saying, well, I'm feeling angry, or I'm feeling sad, or I'm feeling hurt that such and such, happened. People were let go, but they were not given any time, and they weren't given, something happened that seemed unfair, and I'm carrying the burden of that, and it needs to be heard. It needs to be put out there.
So this feels to me then, Harrison, as well as you're talking, I'm kind of getting a very strong sense that you embody this. This is not just kind of a process that you put people through or you talk to people about. There's something embodied in you that is there as an elder representing the whole.
That's a beautiful way to put it. Embodied. It has to be. This is the difference between walking the walk and talking the talk. This is not something that you can take in a book and pull out as a checklist. It's that kind of, I could talk about it in the book, but the knowledge itself has to be lived, right? And has to be, there's a certain level of courage to do that, to step into those kind of environments that are fraught, that are tense, but they're also real. People do open up and do want to have something happen. And is the system, are there enough guardrails in place and enough agreement beforehand with whoever is hosting the approving the meeting to make that happen, to have some openness and honesty and people to really look at it. So just the fact that we're putting something out there and bringing it to light and bringing group consciousness to it actually has a healing dynamic. That in itself can shift things once something's been heard and seen and felt and talked about in an authentic way without getting into laying the overlap. Okay, I'm the good guy, you're the bad guy. We gotta get past that duality to a place of, hey, here's a hurt, and where is this getting reenacted from? We can bring in that dimension, and that's a powerful start to bring all the parts into the hidden parts into the room. Now, as you start to do that, that's where the mystery becomes a puzzle, because there were parts that were missing, that were not seen, that were not heard, but we're still impacting the system and being reenacted in some way. Now, the challenge with the social system, we're talking hundreds of years, right? We're talking a lot of history where there's still an unacknowledged impact. And what we're going through, at least in the US, is a great reckoning where we're starting to really say, hey, this did happen. And it's still happening. Some echo of it is still happening, like lynching. That was a terrible aspect of American history, where thousands of Black men were murdered in a public way. And have we really reconciled that? Have we really built memorials to that? No, but we're starting to look at what happened in Tulsa, Oklahoma, for example, where, again, a whole community was wiped out and there was no discussion. It was repressed. This has to happen because the memory of these events, the trauma of them, is still in the system, and people are still acting out echoes of that. So reconciliation, we're talking about transforming social systems that have the possibility of doing that. I think elderhood is essential, because someone who's up there and has love and insight and compassion for everybody in the system, even the perpetrator, even the relatives of the perpetrator, or whatever. The perpetrators are long gone, but the relatives are still there, descendants. So the victims are gone, but the descendants are still there, and the echoes are still in the system. So,
and I can see
this is different.
I can see that kind of, this holding of the space and the need for that elder. And I know we might think that's someone older, but I think sometimes when we do get older, we get more benevolent.
Hopefully. Or we get more cranky.
Yeah, not everyone. Yeah. But I suppose I'm kind of thinking about how I would feel like if kind of in those scenarios where it was really painful, and someone like yourself shows up who's kind of got a very benevolent fatherly presence. So it would feel safer that somebody can hold this. Someone's got the capacity to hold this, because
and at the same time, be able to articulate what's very difficult to be articulated, right? To talk about help articulate some of those not easy to feel feelings, especially in a public space, in a collective setting, and not get overwhelmed by them. What happens, and it's a legitimate fear, this material can be so overwhelming that people do go into a reactivity mode and say and do things that are not helpful. So there's the other side of it, the strength. The strength of the elder that makes it safe, and the authority, the willingness to take authority and use authority for the good of all. And that has to be communicated. I'm not here to be a dictator, but I'm here to run this meeting, and please follow my guidance and the ground rules that we're setting up, the agreements that we're setting up. Please follow them.
And I think kind of often when whoever's brought us in, sometimes there may be kind of a feeling of needing to be loyal to that person who's been, but they're part of the system. So I'm just kind of wondering how do you work with that? When you've been brought in by someone, and how do you contract for that? What sort of things do you do with that?
Well, hopefully, and this doesn't always work. Hopefully, they will be willing to be on the hot seat, willing to hear difficult stuff, difficult feedback, and to put that out front. We need to talk about some topics here that people are afraid to talk about. I'll make it safe because I'll be the voice. I won't be their voice. Maybe I'll be the one putting out, hey, here's some of the concerns that people are afraid to tell, to speak truth to power. So I'll take that role, and I'm able to do it, or let's say the elder is able to do it, because the elder does not belong to the system as in terms of I'm trying to keep this job here forever, or trying to be they're a little bit separate from the system and have that independence. There's a certain degree of independence. And so they are enabled to speak truth to power because of that special role. He's someone that we both trust or both see as nonpartisan, as independent. So fair, I don't want to say judge, but it's just a guide, a fair guide that will help us get to where we need to go, without creating, again, it's the challenge. We don't want to create more damage and bad feelings and acting out, but we want to discuss the bad feelings and the bigger picture, because often the disturbance in the system, and this is where this systemic shamanic, again, that's the shark side, the puzzle. There's a disturbance here. Where's this coming from? And let me speak of an example. Like I remember someone was talking about to me where the system, and I've seen this, has a need to have a scapegoat. Someone is going to be in the scapegoat for that system, because somewhere that got established in perhaps with the founder, or with the somewhere hidden in the background of the history of it. Something got established, and it's a dysfunction the system keeps replicating out. Now, you can't change it unless you can get people in a room and articulate, hey guys, let's look at what's going on here. And what was missing, or what happened in the past that's affecting the present that we're not acknowledging. And when you do that, something shifts in the consciousness. Something can shift in the consciousness of that organization. Organizations, strangely enough, have their own consciousness or collective spirit, just like a family does, just like we do. But there are large groups of people that have some type of agreement about how we're going to do things and who we are and our identity. So coming in with a set of eyes that can help see that, ask the questions for that, and intuit that is, I think, again, would be a role of an elder who is not attached to a particular side or point of view, but is open to all of it. And then ask the question, okay, what needs to be said, seen, heard for the system to come together? Because here's something you could trust. Systems seek wholeness. Families seek wholeness. Individuals seek wholeness. Everyone I know, they want to get, if they have issues, they would like to resolve those issues. They don't know how, but there's an innate drive towards more wholeness. And you'll see that, we'll see that time and time again with a group of people, that given the right structure, container, that movement will take place.
So, I mean, I'm looking at eldership. You talked about, shamanism in this book. What's the difference in your mind between an elder and a shaman, if there is any? I'm not sure. So what's your thinking about that?
Well, when we're talking about shaman, again, we're working with the intangibles that are having a tangible impact. An elder may or may not do that, but they bring an attention to the whole system, right? A sense of concern and positivity for all the groups involved that allow them to be effective, effective and build trust with all those groups, and are looking to create a better outcome for the whole system, for the whole community or family. And that's what the shaman is looking to do. So there's a lot of overlap. The thing I think would be that the shaman or the shaman is informed a little bit more in terms of working with the intangible. But elders, you pick that up. You have a long, if you've been around the block a while and you want to step into that role, again, there's an implication. You're stepping back from being a certain activist role in the system for a certain agenda to more of a bigger, well, how can we support everyone here to be that happy family, to be that functional organization. So there's one, I think maybe the elder that comes with a spiritual perspective would be almost the same thing. And by a spiritual perspective, in constellation work, that we talk about the knowing field and working with the field, the knowing field. And then what needs to be seen or heard, the solution focus that Hellinger talks about will emerge naturally from the field, because that's the field of intelligence, pure intelligence. And if we want to work with the knowing field, that non-judgment is required. The field's not judgmental. Whatever's happening has emerged from the field. This is like the quantum field of everything that's emerged from that quantum void, and it goes back to it. Physicists tell us it's always happening continuously. There's always an emergence and a going back into, and then a reemergence thousands of times a second. So everything is new, everything is possible. It's the field of all possibilities. And it's our intention that collapses a particular way, our own conditioning collapses a particular wave function that leads to the reality that we're dealing with. Well, this is merging of some science and spirituality when you look at it from that perspective, that we're in a field of all possibilities. And if we're non-judgmental, simply in agreement with what is and surrendered what is, and observing as the observer what's being emerged, then we have more possibility in changing, drawing upon all the possibilities, selecting a different one that we want to collapse in the particular reality that we're experiencing. So, long story short, I want to work with that level of power and insight. Then I need to show up empty, without judgments, without preconceptions, without taking sides, but simply with the love and goodwill for all concerned. I show up with that emptiness, but that fullness of perspective, and without reactivity.
And I can see
things can
that
happen.
again. I can see that part of your role as an elder is to bring that knowing field, that awareness of the knowing field, because most people, certainly in organizations or even social systems, are not consciously aware of that field. So again, you're kind of symbolically embodying that knowing field and bringing that to people as well.
Yeah, the therapeutic term is co-regulation, where the therapist or the mentor is a stabilizing force to the person or the group, because they are calm, open, resourceful, and not contracted into some particular reactive mode, a survival mode, fight, flight, freeze, faint, fawn. They're all survivor modes. So the mentor is is not going there, is stepping back and seeing that and able to support or bring about the possibility there's enough safety that we don't have to go into survival mode, because there is no solution in a survival mode. There's only repetition of the trauma. Basically, it just keeps representing itself and being reenacted. So to interrupt that, you need to co-regulate, which is to help the person gain more stability and calmness and look at things more dispassionately.
So again, that you're bringing that in your presence, that's an embodied.
Yeah, that's a good way to say it. It's an embodiment working with the field. It's really not us, come to think of it. We're empty, we're opening up. We don't have a dog in the fight. We're not there for our ego. We're there for that higher good. And then the universe steps through and supports that attitude of being there for what needs to happen here. What's the highest thought, highest good? How can I support that? When we get caught up in partisanship, taking sides, that can mean we're kind of part of the system. We become part of the system and we're less effective. And it happens, as a consultant, I work with a client for a long time. I get to be, I start taking sides. I start becoming part of the system. And so I'm a little less effective.
I mean, you've been in this field an awful lot longer than me. And when you first started to kind of step in and cross that threshold into bringing this into your work, into your life, what was that like for you? And how long ago was that?
Oh, it was a long time. Well, and I think I started doing ropes courses and team building in 88 was when I started. I was kind of struck by I didn't realize what I was getting into, basically. But, people said, okay, we need to go offsite. Okay, great. So we'd go offsite, we'd do some outdoor team building games and stuff. And then, all right, we got to talk about how does what happened in the activities, these team building activities, relate to what's going on in the workplace. And people had a safe way to say, oh, when we all stepped on the board and the leader wasn't really paying attention to what we were doing, it's just like how we do a project. The leader's too busy working on the project to pay attention to the overall. And so we fell off, and that's what happens. They can start making analogies. This happens here, but it's just like what happens back in the office in a way that was safe and not as, they could laugh about it a little bit. And started to see, oh, well, it's really about having these kinds of conversations or bringing awareness so that we catch ourselves being ourselves and can make a decision at that moment. Oh, maybe we should do something different. And then reaching some agreements about what those differences would be. So
when did you bring the systemic thing in then? So if you started off doing that work in 1988, when did you?
I 2000. So it was sometime later when it was 2000 when Hellinger came to DC, and I went to his first workshop here and was blown away by it. And then went over soon after, went to maybe the next year, went to a conference in Holland where they did organizational constellation. But interesting enough, all the work, the constellations would end up being personal constellations. We'd start off with an organizational issue, but it would get personal. So basically, I started to see how my own self, the leader's self, history is affecting the reality I'm experiencing in the team. And the team's reality is affected by the history in the organization, and the organization is affected by the history in the society. So there's a fractal effect. This whole structure is a set of fractals, and we're so affected by forces that we don't even realize, or things that happen in our family that we don't even realize, that make it very difficult to change, because we don't realize how what happened with our grandparents is still a theme that's being played out in our own life until we bring awareness to it. And then when we do that, we can we can dissolve some of those hidden beliefs and agreements and free ourselves from that reenactment. Same is true with organizations. You know, they're caught up in hidden agreements that are not helpful to them, or hidden beliefs. And until they're really able to see it, especially the leader, not the whole organization, just even the leader, that can save everyone a lot of frustration and difficulty.
Mm. Mm-hmm. And so what was the reaction from your kind of clients when you started to bring this work in then?
Well, it's actually, you know, you can do this without being too overt about it. So we just set up small groups that represent the system, and have them talk about what it's like to be in that particular group of the system and what their needs are and wants are. And then it starts coming out. Set up something for the past, it starts coming out. So you don't have to trying to explain constellation work, people's eyes glaze over. They're not, what the heck are you talking about? So I gave that up very quickly, trying to explain it, and just would set it up in a oh, let's do this exercise, let's do this scenario planning reenactment, and make it very normal, and then insights emerge. The idea is we want some actionable insights. So let's set something up and see how the dynamics play out here are like what the dynamics play out in that we're currently dealing with, and see if there's some hidden factors that we can isolate. And so people are open to that. We're not, if we try to explain it too much, then it gets muddled. So.
Well, I know, in my experience, people then start debating with you about it instead of trying to get people start debating about it rather than doing
yeah, of course,
stepping in and doing it,
and
experiencing it. They start talking about it instead.
Yeah, they get very mental debate. Yeah, of course, and they're trying to understand it, and it's not understandable. In fact, when I first saw it, I was puzzled. What in the world's going on here? It didn't make sense to me. I wasn't tracking why people were reacting to the way they're reacting. And so you have to understand, yeah, someone first seeing this, they might have that similar reaction. So that's okay. Just make it simpler and more relevant to the current moment, where it can go deeper. And this has been helpful to me, is when I'm working in a certain system, dealing with something, and I, as the facilitator, feel like I have a mandate to get a better handle on what's going on, I can bring in some associates. We can I can talk to them. Here's what I'm noticing. Let's set that up. And then something shows up. Oh, yeah, this needs to be part of the consulting dynamic, or I need to just be aware of this. So I might do an actual constellation with some associates who are not part of the business. Or I might, in coaching with the leader, let's set up something with objects and look at how things are playing out, and what does this remind you of? And then, you know, so we're doing a constellation. I don't call it that, but we're just looking at the system dynamics. And they're very open to that. So you do it, just do it. Don't explain.
Yeah.
Otherwise you get caught up in that.
And you know, what kind of made you decide to call your book The Corporate Confessions of a Corporate Shaman? What was the...
Well, you know, it's funny. I had that title for years. I had that title almost, I don't know, early 2000s. And it just sat around for a long, long time. I didn't do anything. I did a little bit of research on shamanism and how, you know, are there certain rituals that that will help move the energy in a group? Just like there are certain rituals that help move energy in our own family system, and with nature, and that a shaman might do. But I didn't put anything to paper. And then finally I sat down and started writing, and yeah, we're talking about the intangible and how it affects the tangible. So in that sense, we are playing the corporate shaman role. And so I just kind of like the title. it might be a little confusing, I don't know, but
Well, it drew me in. It
yeah,
really drew me in. I
good,
loved it.
good.
Yeah, because I suppose I'd never seen, you know, because when I was working at the business school, which is when I came across your book, you know, the business school, we were doing work around shamanism. We were doing that work, but we didn't talk about it. We didn't label it that.
Yeah.
So to actually have it explicitly labeled on the front of a book, it's like, oh wow.
Well, it's probably smart not to label it, because I know for some people, clients would be a turnoff, but for others like us who are very, curious and looking for connections everywhere, it's kind of, yeah, that seems to fit. That seems to.
Well, in a way, it's kind of, because I think, I mean, I've been in management consultancy, like 30 years, but it's and people think they know what a management consultant does, or they know what an organizational development consultant does, but actually everybody's different in the way that they'll approach things from different perspectives. So I loved what this was talking about, because for me it was bringing in a very different perspective, looking at an organization rather than looking at it through models and theories and intellectual stuff. For me, this was much deeper and much more connected to the knowing field, I suppose.
Well, I think what's part of the problem of our society in general, and business in general, why we are doing things to the planet and to each other that are not helpful, is that we're caught in a mental structures. The mind dominates our thinking, our sense of reality and what's possible. And it's very, we're not taught to think about things in a more nonverbal, visual or sensory way that goes beyond the limits of the mind. The mind's very limited. It's great tool, as Einstein said, but it shouldn't be the master. But we make the mind the master. So if things have to make sense in a certain way, we limit ourselves in terms of what's really going on in this world. There's a lot of dimensions affecting reality that you and I are experiencing that we don't acknowledge. So the mind is like the first floor of the house. All the activities happening in the house at that first floor, and that's where people live. But if you want to really know what's going on, you need to go up to the second floor where there's more spiritual awareness. You need to go to the attic where there's maybe being and pure awareness. You need to go down to the basement where there's all this archetypes and collective consciousness. There's a whole range here that our educational system doesn't acknowledge and is frankly a little bit afraid of.
And
And
why do you think we are afraid of that?
It's the unknown. It's probably the unknown. People don't want to talk about look at themselves and really ask questions about what's going on in their subconscious. Let me just keep it down there so that those doors are locked. Or the need for control. The mind wants to be, the ego wants to be in control. And so these other areas, there's less of the personal self and more of the universal self. So letting go of that kind of limited identity and sense of control, which in fact it never does have that control. It's an illusion that it has control. But I think that's a lot of driving our educational values and system, a lot more than we realize in the West. Maybe in other cultures, there's an appreciation of the larger dimensions, other dimensions.
Yeah. And I'm curious to think about how could we apply some of this now? How would we apply some of this to some of the difficulties that we've got in terms of the trauma that's happening? I think what's good is we're talking about trauma, And I think there's starting to be recognition of kind of where trauma shows up and it being labelled as trauma. So I certainly know when I first started talking about trauma at the business school, there was almost like this frisson of, oh, don't mention the word trauma in relationship to organisations. I mean, I did. I still talked about it because, because from my own experience, it was trauma. But there was this kind of, we don't label it that way. We say there's a difficulty or there's a problem or, what I mean, rather, or, there's a conflict, but they don't talk about it being maybe trauma. So I'm kind of wondering how would we, what sort of things can we do to take this work and meet organisations in this space and talk about trauma? Have you got any?
Well, the very first, the thing that I think any elder that wear the crown of elderhood, the title of elderhood, is that we've done our own work in terms of looking at what's affected us traumatically in our life, not only currently in our work life, but in childhood or with our generational, transgenerationally, or other dimensions, or in society. What's affected us and how are we acting that out unconsciously? So where is there some sort of compensation in terms of our behavior and our attitudes that are really about the mind trying to gain control? And it's not really being helpful. It's the reactivity we talked about. That's we're in survival mode. And then when you're in survivor mode and caught up in reactivity or grasping or aversion and the judgment of that, we're not accessing the field of greater intelligence. We lose that. So we got to be willing to have the mental discipline to say, okay, where am I coming from? Where is my thought process coming from? And am I in reactive survival mode? Or is this something that's much more the greater intelligence that I'm a part of, that I can manifest, that I can be in service of? So two very different things. And one is to notice where we're coming from. Because when we come from a place of being, then all possibilities we come along with us to something to move and shift in ways that we won't even consciously be aware of, but unconsciously the whole system will be enlivened because there's more consciousness. Then if we have more of that consciousness, then we can look at a system and say, okay, where does awareness need to increase? Where is awareness constricted by trauma? Because that's what it is. Trauma shuts things down. It's kind of a dying, and it's a body's reaction, a legitimate reaction to shock, to shut things down. But if there's no holding so that can be integrated and released, that stays in the system and we get limited in some way. We're not seeing the bigger picture. We're just seeing that disturbance. And then we start doing things that are based on survivor mode. So once we've done our own work, then we can see where the system needs to be held and brought to more awareness, and then clear up some false beliefs and realign what it's trying to do. So inner, outer, it starts with us. And that's the use of self. Consultants talk about the use of self a lot as you go into the system and work with a client. But to have that self to use, we have to do our own difficult and not easy healing work. And it's an ongoing thing. The interesting thing is I've seen over and over again, the issue going on with the client has something to relates to my own issue, and also relates to the larger social issue. There can be, again, it can be a fractal of one related to the other at a different scale. So the change, be the change you want to see in the world goes back to that.
So one of the things that from an eldership point of view that I always talk about is people being able to find what their eldership niche is. Almost like, and my sense of that is it comes from the kind of the gift that comes from the trauma and the patterns that are in our ancestral system. So, you know, one of the things that I know, and obviously we've, you know, you as my teacher, we've worked on some of these areas. And, you know, so I know, for instance, because there's been a lot of social impact on my ancestral system that then has affected the patterns and survivor patterns within my system, draws me to want to do work healing those social systems. So that, you know, so that's part of my niche, is that's what I'm interested in. That's what kind of energizes me, and what I feel I have an authority on. You know, from your perspective, can you get a sense of what your niche is, Harrison? What would your niche be? You know, have you found a pattern of the kind of organizations show up, or kind of leaders who show up to you, or, you know, who are attracted to you, or you're attracted to them? Have you got a sense of what your...
Yeah, that's a beautiful question. And as I'm thinking about it in different ways, one is kind of like being with groups that are historical enemies, like working in the development field. You're often some of these fragile states, you know, will have in the development organization, international development, groups that have been in conflict with themselves, they're forming a state, but there's a lot of polarization, tribalism, you could call it. And how do you build trust in that kind of a system when there's an inherent distrust, inherent animosity? So this kind of polarization, that's not so much what you said to me, but what our ancestors said to each other, right? It's kind of carries that forward, and out of loyalty to the ancestors, or to the community that have tensions, we're going to replicate those tensions. So we're, you know, some of the where in my own system is there some reenactment of some historical injustice or mutual injustice that was acted out by relatives long departed, but still gets recreated in the system some way, some kind of poisoned discussion, like, where is this coming from? So I guess it's the mystery. I get caught up in the mystery when I see conflicts in a system that really seem to be much bigger than what people are citing as the reason for the conflict. In other words, there's much more charge there than I would think would be warranted. Like, okay, we're adults. Okay, sometimes we disagree. Let's agree to disagree, move on. But they can't. They're gripped by, they're not seeing each other. They're seeing something back there, someone back there. And whether they even know that person or that situation, they're seeing something else and speaking to that, not even hearing it. So in my family system, some of that dysfunction I've seen play out in other groups that I've been in, either, you know, with me or with you know, or the groups I work with, some sort of inherent hostility that doesn't see the other person, but sees some threat that really actually isn't there. And then
one part of your niche then is, if I'm hearing this right, is a real strong polarity pattern.
Yeah, polarity around a mysterious conflict. Like, really, come on, guys. We don't really need to be holding each other as the devil, you know, because we're not, holding each other as evil, because we're not, but we are. And the conflict becomes irreconcilable very quickly, but the actual causes don't seem to measure up to that. You know, the actual differences are not that extreme, not as extreme as the conflict has become in terms of the feeling level and the aversion. So that's always been a question. Why are people acting that out? Why is this happening? What's this all about? Why? It seems unnecessary suffering.
And that to me connects to then again, the shamanism, because of course that, you know, that sense of, I mean, we term it evil, but it's almost like these shadowy things that, which are obviously fear driven, survivor driven. Where are they? And they're active somewhere, and we've got to kind of work out what they are in order to kind of release them from the system.
Yeah, I think it's, again, there's ways which we personify these energies that are negative or positive, you know, the angel versus the devil, the deva versus the rakshasa. Different cultures personify them and give them a personality, but they're also some kind of just energy or belief that has an impact until it's addressed, and are a certain level of, I don't know if it's like a virus. There's a certain level of, it's not really alive, but it acts like it's alive kind of thing, because it co-opts the systems that it's in. So you were, in a way, we're an immunologist. We're looking at the viruses and saying, hey, let's clear that virus. It's not.
Oh, that's a great way of putting it, isn't it?
Yeah, it's not helpful. It's not actually even, it looks like it's alive, but it's not. It's feeding off the organizational systems to replicate itself.
Yeah,
and
this idea there's a virus in the system, and that you can work with working out what that virus might be and helping them release it. Yeah.
Right. And how's it, what's the symptoms? How's it affecting, you know, because the symptoms are there, but they are symptoms. They're not the problem. We need to get down to the antiviral. We need a little antiviral medicine here, truth, to dissolve it and free ourselves of its influences. But all this is kind of just different ways of looking at how do we do something that's a restorative, you know, because we want a happy family, we want a happy childhood, we want a happy organization. And the repairs, you know, misunderstandings happen and repairs need to be made. So how do we hold a space where those things can be addressed and we can move on in a positive direction instead of at each other's, you know, throat direction. And it's, you know, it's kind of what life wants to happen. It definitely wants to move that way. We just have to find a way to get out of the way and allow that to take place. But it's very fulfilling, you know, it's kind of really interesting after you have some intervention and you feel, oh, the atmosphere is lighter. You feel, oh, there's a new set of possibilities here, and there's more clarity and more alignment around what they're clear on. So it's a wonderful feeling to see that happen. So you can live off those kind of conversations. You can live off that for a week or two.
Until you're the next virus.
Then you got to go back and be a regular person for a while. Yeah.
You know, and you so beautifully use love and the word love, you know, in the work that you do and the way you talk about it. And it isn't a word that we tend to use in the context of systems and organizations and social systems. But you know, I know one of the first things that I noticed when starting to do this work was that there was a real palpable feeling of love, you know, for instance, particularly when working in groups, because that's often we don't consciously experience that often in groups where it's not family or whatever, and suddenly there's a feeling of love and connection and warmth and, you know, wholeness and oneness, which is such a really lovely feeling as well. So
yeah, people talk about some of their high points of their life is when they're in a high performance team that really comes together. Group of people really come together and they feel supported and supportive, and they have a clear purpose and they have an identity and they feel like they're making a difference. The mission is they bought into, and they may be under a lot of pressure, not much time, not enough resources, but they find a way. People talk about that as really a wonderful experience for them, you know, a high point of their career. But what is that? That's love in action. You know, that's
Yeah.
really wholeness in action. Where we're not our own little ego self, we're something bigger, part of something that's meaningful in a positive, bigger way. So yeah, I think short way to call it, yeah, love in action. We get
Well,
out of yourself.
I think on that note, Harrison, I think we've
All
done
right.
what we've done to do. Thank you so much.
Oh, wonderful being with you
your
today.
session.
Really
Absolutely
delight.
brilliant.
Yeah, we'll hold up the picture of the book here. People do want to get it, they see what it looks like. And
Yeah, he's got his little feather in his briefcase.
yeah, a little feather on the briefcase. My sister designed that in LA. She's an artist, so I was great of her to do that. Next book coming out is around leadership and awareness. So some of the things I talked about, hopefully this year it'll come out, will be leading from an expanded awareness. And how does that work? What does that look like?
I'm really looking forward to that. That's amazing.
Yeah, but we could have a talk on that one.
Yeah, I have to do it
All
again.
the best.
All again. That's great. Thanks,
All
Harry.
right. All the best.